So genetics, I find, is becoming more and more talked about. There's more and more of these home tests. Some of them really focused on certain areas. How do you view genetics versus epigenetics in a health picture, and which one do you weight more?
I mean, they always say genetics loads the gun and the environment pulls the trigger, right? That's it. So when we're looking at like genetics, we wouldn't even have epigenetics if we didn't have all this other garbage happening in the environment to mess up genetics, right? Like genetics to me is just a little skewed just because like when we did the human genome project and we were going to look and see like all these differences between us and everybody else, like there wasn't. That's why we scrapped it because we realized like, there's a lot of genes, but they have more ways to express themselves. So I guess we'd put more weight to epigenetics. But like our genes ran pretty good if we didn't like piss them off. Right? If we didn't again have all these man-made things, like we're here after a long time, many generations. So if genetics were really that bad, like it's hard because in medicine we'll go back to genetics, right? We'll say, wow, you got cancer because like it's in your genes, and you're like, well, like 3 generations ago, nobody had cancer. Like it was really hard to do the numbers and regress it and say like, how was it 1 in like 10,000 and a day it's 1 in 2, and that's all genetics, like because it's the same genetics as it was 200 years ago, but the numbers don't match up. Numbers don't match up in cardiovascular disease, certainly not in dementia, certainly not in cancer. So we have a hard time with genetics blaming it on genetics. In medicine, it's a cop-out to say, oh, you have heart disease because it's in your genes. And you're like, well, I think I would have died by now, right? My genes would have died out if like we were this sensitive to like having some. Now there's some like you can have tendencies, and that's epigenetics, right? If I'm exposed to a bunch of plastics and my genetics aren't used to that, then they're going to do something different. So I think epigenetics and like DNA methylation tests to look at biological ages and some of that stuff and look at detox capacities, I think that's useful. How does that change the environment? It doesn't. Right? Like, so sometimes again, like learning how your machine runs with genetics, you only need to do that once because it's not going to change. Right? And maybe we'll get gene therapies and great stuff down the road, but we certainly don't have it now. So it all comes back to that environmental like load on our genes that is the real problem. Our genes are pretty good, right? Minus some inborn genetic errors, and there are some. But those usually solve themselves. Other than that, it's really the way that our genetics were expressed by being irritated. And when they're irritated again by man-made things, which we all did, then they probably do something different than they were intended to do, and that causes the problem. So I would put epigenetics way up here and genetics way down here.
Yeah. That's been completely my experience too. I feel like in 100 years, we'll look back and be like, well, we blame genetics on a lot of things we just didn't really understand at the time because some of the explanations.
We should blame the environment like 99% of it and genetics 1%. And that would probably be a better way to go, to be like, oh crap, sorry guys, like we screwed this up and like our bodies aren't made to do this. Because you're like, okay, so like how do we explain infertility today? Like, is that genetic? Like, come on. That's just like, we're having stupid biological conversations that we know aren't true. And like we're finding genetic links to things because we're looking so hard to find it. But then we're like, oh, Roundup seems to be good for everybody. And it's like, well, it's not, right? Like, look, it's not good. Like we can say probably 90, maybe even 95% of cancers now are environmental. We can say that. Everybody can. Like, it's okay to say. So we're coming to that point probably in medicine because we know the genetic therapy didn't evolve like we wanted to. And it's not good for the public anyways to say like 95% of cancers are environmental. Sorry. Like, so we're always like, well, you didn't have a choice. It was your genes that did it to you. Wasn't you, it wasn't the environment. It was like your grandpa. Okay. Like I was destined to get sick. And then that's like, I don't know. Doesn't make any sense as far as ancestry goes. So we should pass.
Yeah. Yep. And just, right there, it gives the epigenetics tends to give people more power back power over where they're headed, power over to change the direction if they want. Whereas genetics, a lot of times, like you said, it's just like, you're powerless. This is what you have. These are the cards you were dealt, and tough draw.
I mean, we do it at the Olympics every year, right? Like we see people that are built for sprinting and people that are built for distance running. Those are genetics, right? I'm slow twitch, fast twitch. Like I know what I can, but that doesn't mean like if you can't sprint fast, you can't sprint. Like it's all fine. But if you sprint every day, all day, doesn't matter if you're genetically born to do it or not, you'll get knee replacements, right? Like I promise you, like it. So genes allow you to do something. Training or epigenetics allows you to accentuate it. But there's like a sprinter isn't designed to like have his knees replaced just because his genetics say he is. Like it's just, that's not going to happen. So the genetic conversation, just need to stop giving people, that's an excuse. We just keep giving people excuses, and then we keep medicating because their genes are bad. It's like, I don't know, take the hamburger out of your mouth. Like what do you want me to do? Right. Like, it's hard because again, I feel like I'm a savvy veteran in this field now. And I went through all the narratives, and those ones don't make sense. Like we should stop making excuses and like get to problem solving.
Yeah. God, I totally agree. That's why I was so excited to have you on, because if you're in that framework, the narratives you're talking about, then you cannot solve the problem from that place, because there's these assumptions that'll keep you stuck in the loop. So having these discussions and exposing people to these ideas outside of it gives them a path to a better solution if they want it, which
Correct.
is really
And
the
if
goal.
once you're in like one of those paths, like if you get really into like epigenetics and you never get out of that hole. And I'm like, well, people come in and be like, oh, my genes and I did all my genetic testing. This is my tendencies and my detox capacity. And I'm like, how were you 15 years ago? Fine. Okay, well, let me tell you something. Like your genes are the same as they were 15 years ago. Right. So like what? Like get out of there. Right. Get out of that hole. Like just stop. That's a contributor. But like, again, unless you were born and there was an inborn error in which like you would have known, like you were doing pretty good for a long period of time. So let's get back to doing pretty good for a long period of time. Let's get out of this biochemistry, because it's not everything, right? It's one thing. It's not everything.